Stories are about the people who see us, the people who truly see us. My name is Osadmebi, and every week I will tell you a short story written by a Nigerian writer or author. That's the long and short of it. So without much ado, this week's story is by Fatimah Otukoya, and it's titled No Small Thing. Lawale let out the breath he had not realized he was holding as the rickety danfo sputtered to a stop. It was a few minutes to 3 o'clock. With the sweltering heat, he had sweat trailing down his back, but the heat and his sweaty shirt were the least of his problems. His heart was heavy, and coming back here like this was something he had never imagined. Her face was still as clear as day in his mind, and the corner of his lips turned up in a small smile as he remembered the many evenings he spent fanning the flames of the makeshift stove. Lawale's mind was all over the place as he boarded the taxi which would take him to the outskirts of his village. Oga, na 300 naira be your money o, the driver said, and he gave a small nod. The journey started, and he placed his head on the window as he watched the scenery scroll past. They soon passed Olumo Rock, and in that moment, the meaning of the giant monument felt very apt. Olumo, meaning trouble and sufferings are all over it, was very specific to how he felt coming home after all these years with nothing to show. Iyagba was all he had. He had promised her wonders when he left the village, but all he now had to offer was a heavy heart and a head hung in shame. He remembered the day his uncle had taken him away from the village, with nothing but a wooden sculpture she had carved for him, smiles and promises of a brighter future. A tear made its way out of his eye, and he turned his head away from the window before drifting off into a light slumber. He woke up when he felt the car turn into a rocky road, and the earthy smell, like the insides of a potter's workshop, bade him welcome. The familiarity of it all made him feel like he only left yesterday. When the car stopped, he let out a sigh as his stomach churned in discomfort. Lawale shook his head, paid the taxi driver and stepped out of the car. Everything still looked the way it was when he left, save for an old rusty sign that said, "Welcome to Iluake." He mumbled a small prayer before beginning the walk towards the woman who raised him. He walked past the little farm where he and Iyagba used to grow crops, and he smiled when he saw how well things still stood. He walked past the village square where he used to play gidigbo with other village boys. And he blushed when he walked past the woods where he and Iyabo used to secretly meet twice a week. "Omo Iyagba," someone called from afar, dragging him out of his thoughts. He looked up to see the old but sturdy figure of Iyabo's father. He stood straighter and walked towards the small mud hut. "Ekurolesa," he greeted shakily, wheezing when the old man stood up and enclosed his figure in a firm hug. "Iyagba has missed you," he said when he released Lawale from his hold. "I know, Baba, I know," he replied in a less enthusiastic voice. "How has she been doing, since I left?" he asked, looking up to the taller old man. "You know how she is. That woman is twice any man I know. You remember Aremu? He was not more than 5 years old when you left. He is the one that now helps her out. And in fact, you should be there right now," he replied, and Lawale widened his eyes before prostrating in gratitude. "My son, there is no need for all that, Oya. Run along now. I am sure she will be excited to see you." Baba Iyabo finished, tapping him on the back, signaling he was free to be on his way. Lawale called out another thank you as the old man receded into his house before continuing his walk home. It was now almost evening, and as he approached, he could make out the figure of a younger boy crouched next to a stove, fanning the flames. He slowed down his pace as he got closer. He gently placed a hand on the young boy's back, startling him. Lawale introduced himself before collecting the plastic fan from his hands. He stared into the face of the boy who had taken care of his grandmother all these years and said, "Thank you, Aremu. Thank you." The boy stood and stared for a moment, nodded gently before running home. Crouching down next to the stove, Lawale started fanning the flames, thinking of what he would say as he waited for Iyagba to come outside. Aremu, please help me to... Iyagba paused when she saw the man crouching before her. He stood. She dropped the bowl of water she was carrying and ran into his arms, tears streaming down her face as prayers poured from her lips. Lawale couldn't help but laugh despite the tears in his eyes, as she kissed him all over his face, rambling about how he had lost so much weight. He walked back to his bags and carried them into the little apartment that was more home to him than any city. He gave vague answers to her questions, doing more smiling and nodding than talking. He still was not sure how he was going to tell her that he had achieved nothing, that Lagos had not been the dreamland he had expected, that his talent meant nothing amongst the masses, that he had failed. Instead, he smiled and said nothing at all. Lawale kept his gaze on the burning embers as he fanned the flames. Iyagba's silence and gaze was telling of the questions he knew she had, but he did not have it in him to look at her or respond. He could feel his emotions hanging by a thread, so when he felt her warm hands on his back, he tensed his shoulders and willed himself to hold it in. But then she called his name, the way only she knew how to. He broke and found his way back into her embrace. Olawale ọmọ mi, talk to me, please. She whispered into his ears as she held him with a fierceness he did not think she could still muster. Mama, I failed, he whimpered, burying his face into her chest. Iyagba lifted his head from her chest and stared into his tear-stained face. Talk to me, she said to him again, louder this time, and Lawale sniffled before shifting out of her embrace. Mama, Lagos was hard, Lawale began, his voice breaking intermittently as he spoke. Iyagba took a deep breath and readjusted herself on her seat. Leaning forward towards Lawale, she put her forehead on his. Talk to me, she said for the third time that night, and Lawale nodded, inhaling deeply before beginning his tale. He told Iyagba everything. How the city of dreams had done nothing but crush his. How every new day over the past few years have been seemingly more difficult than the last. He explained that he'd come back now because he was tired of holding on to a life which did not want to hold him the same way. She listened to him silently. When he was done talking, Lawale heaved and dropped his head onto her laps. Iyagba sighed before taking Lawale's hand in her soft, aged ones. Lawale, look up. Do you see the bats flying by the hundreds? She asked him with both their faces turned to the darkening evening sky. They are blind, but somehow they do not miss their way. Do you know why? It is because Olodumare fends for them. You see that their blindness. It is not that Olodumare hates them. No. It is simply his way of showing us that even in the dark, he, Olodumare, always has them. Just like he always has you. Lawale shifted his gaze away from the sky back to Iyagba's face, to find her looking at him with a gaze so soft, a fresh flood of tears threatened to burst their banks. Iyagba leaned forward in her seat, reached out and held his face. When she started speaking again, her voice shook with unshed tears. Olawale, this is your home. This little door is always open, and I am always here. I know that you know this, but I also know that you do not want to stay. You can give up and you can stay. You are welcome. Or you can go back to the city whenever you are ready. It will not matter to me. I am old. And you and this house are my entire world. But Olawale, this house is not your world. She paused and held his gaze. Clutching her right hand, which was extended towards him, Lawale leaned further into her palm on his cheek. As she continued, her voice rose in conviction and fierceness with every line. If you choose to return to the city, know that it is okay to have a new dream. No era lasts forever, my child. Your new dream may not give you the experiences you may have always wanted, but it may give you a life you never knew you needed. And that is no small thing. And you, Olawale, are no small thing. Do you hear me? Lawale nodded, his eyes now focused on the ground beneath them. Iyagba removed her hand from his face and held onto his shoulders. I want you to say it. You are no small thing. Lawale looked up with his face stained with fresh tears. He sniffled as he shuffled off his chair and knelt before the woman who had always been there for him. The woman he had not returned to for years in fear of disappointing her, of not becoming what he thought she had expected. He now knew how wrong he had been, and the realization crept down his spine, leaving him cold. Mommy, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not returning, he said to her, tears falling down his face even faster, as she waved his apology off with a flick of her hand. Olawale, don't be. Wealth offers no apologies, you know? And you are all my riches. Just say what I want you to say. I am no small thing, he said. She said it again, her gaze still fixed on him. You are no small thing. Say it again. Lawale repeated it after her, again and again. until he felt if anyone asked him for his name in that moment, he would reply with, "I am no small thing." Iya smiled, her eyes fixed lovingly upon him and her tear-stained face matching his. She stood up from the wooden stool, walked slowly back into the house and returned with a lit kerosene lamp. "Oya, fan the flame some more. The fire is dying out and the food is not yet ready. You have had a long day, my child. You should eat something." Lawale took a deep breath before standing from his kneeling position, shifting his own stool back to the base of the flame and picking the plastic fan from the ground. He did not feel entirely okay, but he was deeply convinced he would be better than okay. Smiling, Iyagba began to hum a song she used to sing to him when he was a child, and he began fanning the flames even harder. He would go back to the city. He wasn't sure if he would have a new dream or still try to make his old one work, but he was sure he would always return here. Iyagba was always right, but there was one thing she got wrong. She, and this little house with its makeshift clay stove, were his world too. Fatimah Otukoya is an author and an aspiring surgeon. She spends most of her time being a student and the rest of it writing and reading what she can. Her first book, titled Prompts and Promises, was released last year. It is an e-collection of 10 prose pieces inspired by her friends, interests, and dreams. A link to purchase her book is in the episode description. You can connect with her and read more of her work on Instagram at i.think.i.am.a.nerd and on Medium at Dabira. Details and links will be in the episode description. If you've got a story you would like to be featured on this podcast, or a published book you want to make into an audiobook, send an email to info@osadumebi.com or send me a message at Osadumebi on either Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or X, formerly Twitter. I look forward to collaborating with you. And if you've enjoyed this week's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and tell a friend that stories are a good escape for a few minutes each week.